Board and batten wall panelling is an easy way to transform any room on a budget. I'm about to show you how you can build this using hardly any power tools at all. And I'll show you how you can get a pro finish using simple materials that you can pick up from your local DIY shop. So that by the end of this video, you'll all be able to take on this nice, easy weekend project. So this long wall at the back of the room here looks so plain, and we're gonna transform it. Now, before we head down to B&Q and get any materials to start this project, of course, we need to plan out where our wall paneling is going to go. And there's two things we need for that. We need a tape measure and some frog tape. Links to all the handy things you need for this video will be down in the description. And we're going to start planning out where we want our paneling, what size we want our paneling, and how we want it to look, because it's very important to get the pro finish at the end. The first thing we want to do is select the height. Now, you can choose whatever height you want, but I'm going to go with 1.2 meters. So I'll put my tape measure on the skirting there, and I'll just make a little mark at 1.2. And now what we can do is grab a nice long level. To place your level on the mark, make sure it's nice and level, and then we'll mark 1.2 all the way along our feature wall. Remember, I'm doing this on one wall, but if you're doing multiple walls, you can just transfer that mark all the way around the room on the walls you want to panel. So we can keep it nice and simple and stick with a level, or we can use a laser level. This laser level is an absolute beast and it's perfect for the job. There's a review of this on my second channel and the link will be down below in the description to that if you need a laser level. Now I'm just popping my laser level on a tripod. You don't have to use a tripod, but it does make it easier. And then we're going to set the level so it's roughly where we want it to be. So that line there now goes all the way around the room. So it's a lot easier if you're doing a whole room to do it this way, because you can use the laser level in a much more effective way. But you don't need to. Stick with a level if that's all you've got. So we know our height. We know it's 1.2 from the skirting board. And this is where the frog tape comes in. So that will allow us to get that visual reference because it's nice and bright. So let's start doing some layout. All you're going to do with this frog tape is you're going to stick it along that line. It doesn't have to be millimeter perfect, but try and get it somewhat close, because if it's not level, it won't look right to the eye. This will come off when we panel it anyway, so don't worry too much about any little creases or anything that is on the tape. It is purely for visual reference. So that is our top line complete. We'll fill in the gap for the 100mm battens in a little while, but that does give us a starting point. Now, doing this tape method is great whether you're a DIY or a tradesman. It allows us to get that visual reference without committing to anything before we drill any holes in the wall or put anything on the wall. If we don't like it, we can change it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to carry on with this tape, and then we'll come in and we'll fill in the uprights, and I'll show you how I mark out and measure for those to get those visually perfect as well. Now we're going to have a batten in each corner. Whenever you start a new wall, for each panel you'll want a 100mm strip, so I'm going to put a bit of tape in each of the corners as well. Now all of my panels, the top, the bottom and both the sides, are going to be made from 100mm strips of MDF. So I need to drop that top line down by 100mm and pop another piece of tape on there to create 100mm. I'll do that all the way around. Now we can decide how many panels we want within the space along this wall, and there's a calculation we can use to work out the correct spacing. Now we can draw on here because of course it's going to be covered up, so I'll write down the calculation on the wall here. We want 7 panels, but you can choose however many you want. The first thing you want to do is take a measurement of the width for the wall. For me, it's 3775. Now decide how many of those panels you want. We're going to have 7, so that means we're going to need 8 of the uprights to create the panels. So 8 uprights times 100mm, because that is the width for those uprights. That will give you 800mm. Now we'll go back to our total width and we'll take off that 800mm. That gives me a new number of 2975. And now that number there, you divide that by the number of panels we want, which was 7. And that gives us 425. Now that gives me my new number of the size of each panel, but of course use a number tailored to your wall. This is just my measurement. Take a quick picture of your measurement because you're going to need it later. And now, using their measurements, mock this up with your tape to visualize each panel. There you go, that is my design. I'm happy with the layout. Check you're happy with your layout, and once you are, I'll jump in the van and we'll head down to B&Q. I'll see you there. All the materials you'll need for this project are readily available at a high street DIY store like B&Q. All I'm using for this are 9mm sheets of MDF, enough for a backer board, the length of the wall, and then some of those sheets of MDF I'm having cut into the 100mm battens on B&Q's saw. You can then pick a decorative beading of your choice to finish it off. Now, whilst I was in there, I noticed that you can buy these kits that they have on display, but they're expensive for one. You can't tailor them like you can a kit that you build yourself like we are in this video, and the quality is not as good as well. So I'd certainly recommend building your own kit just like we are in this video, and that gives you much more versatility and a higher quality finish. So you'll notice a few things that I bought at B&Q. I bought 3 sheets of 9mm MDF. Now, I bought 3 sheets and had one cut into the 100mm strips on B&Q's saw because that is a lot easier. And not only does that save you having fancy saws, but it gives a really good cut. So why don't I just go with these strips to create my panels? And why have I bought a 9mm backer board? Well, if we create our strips with the MDF 9mm, like a lot of people would, to create the panel shape, you get a difference in texture. When I've done this before, I've noticed these are very smooth. This, of course, has a kind of stubbled roller finish, and it won't look as 3D. So I like to use a backer board, and that's what the other 2 sheets are for. So make sure you've got your backer boards and your 100mm strips. Cut at B&Q ideally, unless you've got a track saw, you could cut them yourself. I start by lifting my backer board in position. Now make sure you know what you're drilling into before you fix this on the wall, because we're going to attach it with screws. This is a stud wall. In fact, I put this wall here, so I know what it's made of. I will, however, get a stud finder out and check where the studs are so that I screw into them. Be very careful, you're not going to hit any pipes or cables when you do this, and use a detector if you have to. As this is a stud wall, simple way to find studs is a stud buddy. All we need to do is find a screw, it'll magnetize to the screw, and then of course we know where the stud is. So we can just make a little mark where each stud is, and we know where to screw. Now, if you really are not confident drilling into the wall, you could stick your backer board to the wall with contact adhesive. By all means, just bear in mind that if you do ever want to remove it, it will damage the wall, so you lose that little benefit with it. Now we're going to fix our backer board in place. We're going to drill through with a pilot hole. We're then going to countersink for the screw head because we want to fill those later, and then we're going to fix it with some 40mm screws straight through into the studs. So I'll use a 3mm drill bit to drill through into the stud. There we go. Now, before I countersink this and put a screw in, my commitment to you is that if you're not subscribed and you subscribe now, we will continue to help millions of people. We've already helped millions, that's unquestionable. We've helped millions of people with their DIY and projects at home, but I want to help more, and I need your help. I need you to subscribe because that allows the channel to grow and help more people. So if you haven't subscribed already, please do. Right, let's countersink this board. Just use the countersink bit for that in the drill, and then a 40mm screw straight through into the stud to hold it. There we go. That's all we need to do. We can fill those heads later. So that's our first one up. If your room is small enough, you might find you can do it in one board. I'm going to have to cut a board for this gap here, but what we are going to do is get our shop cut edge on this piece here so we get a nice seamless joint. Now I've taken a measurement and I'm going to use a straight edge to draw a line so I know where to cut. Now MDF does cut perfectly fine with a handsaw, so if that's all you've got, use it. I'm going to use a circular saw. I could use a fancy track saw, but this is a lot more accessible. I understand a lot of you won't have a track saw. I do have one. I'm not going to use one. I'm going to use this because that is a tool that you can pick up a lot cheaper than a track saw. So our boards are on and we now have the perfect backing for our panels, and that's what we're going to do next. We can start to recreate the shape that we had with that tape on the wall. We know where it needs to go, so all we need to do is rebuild it. And to do that, we just start using up the 100mm strips that we had cut. Just give them a little sand on the edges, not too much because you'll bevel the edge and it won't look right. So just take any saw marks off if you've got them. If B&Q had a good blade in, you'll get a really good cut. In fact, these are pretty good. So I probably actually won't need to sand a lot of these. Let's start getting them on. So we fix the bottom first and then we'll do the uprights and the top. But here's how I do mine. I get some Gorilla glue and I take the lid off and I pop some of that glue into a pot because it's easier to do it this way than it is to have the lid on. If you have the lid on, it's just a pain in the bum. I use a brush just to brush on a bit of that glue all the way along the back of the piece of MDF. Now we can just sit that on the skirting board all the way into the corner there. And the glue will kind of tack it to the board. It won't stick it yet though. And before we fix it in its final position, just check it's level, which it is, perfectly level, perfectly flush with the skirting. This is just a cheap pin gun with 20mm pins in there. We can just hold the board to our backer board whilst that glue goes off. Now, if you haven't got one of these, you can just use nails and a hammer, but you will need a punch just to countersink the heads of those nails so you can fill them with a bit of wood filler afterwards. You don't need loads of these, just enough to hold it until that glue goes off. So we're done the bottom all the way along. Now, same for that top bit. Get it nice and flush with the top of that backer board, and then just put a pin in the middle. Like that, and that'll hold it. Now we can go along and we can just pin it. Tops and bottoms are done. They look perfect. Now we need to move on to those uprights that fill the space between the top and bottom. Now we're going to start in a corner and just work our way along, repeating the measurements that we did with the tape. Just take a measurement between the top and the bottom. We'll just transfer that mark onto one of our uprights. Now again, you don't need fancy tools to do this. You can make a line and cut it with a handsaw, but we are looking for very much precision because it's a lot easier to do your filling on the next stage. So if you have got a miter saw, use one. If you haven't got one, try and win one on Ultimate Tool Competitions. Now every single week on my website, Ultimate Tool Competitions, we kit you guys out with power tool kits. We want as many winners as possible, and we've already given out in the first 3 months 17 grand's worth of power tools to you guys. So get your name in the hat for this one, an 11-piece Milwaukee power tool kit or £1,000 in tax-free cash, and the tickets are just £1. There aren't many of them. Head to the link in the description and get your name in the hat for this week's power tool kit. Now we fix these in exactly the same way as we did the top and the bottom. Now when you put your glue on the back, just put enough to tack it to it. You don't need to put loads on, it'll all squish out the sides and that will affect your final finish. Fix them in place. So that's our first one. We now know that our next measurement needs to be 425. We know that because we took a picture of it earlier. So 425, that is the start of our next upright. So we've got a little mark there. Each one that we do as we move down the wall, just double check the measurements so that you get that precision. Now before we prime and paint this, because I'll show you the best things to use to do that as well, there's one more bit of timber we need to put on here to finish it off. And that is your top cap that sits on top of your boards to finish them off. Now you can pick whatever style you want. Now this is just a bullnose piece of trim. You can buy these in DIY shops like B&Q. I just picked this one up whilst I was in there. We'll just get this nice and flush. You can maneuver it in and out so it takes up any little gaps behind it between it and the wall, because we don't want to cork this afterwards. We want it to fit really snug. And then we're just going to use our pins again, and we're just going to fire a few through just to hold it on there. Now again, you can use nails if you don't have one of these. Just be careful that you don't split the wood, so you want nice thin nails. So there you go, that is our paneling completed and it looks absolutely fantastic. But we're not done yet, because we now need to get some wood filler. I'll show you how to apply that. So we'll go over that and then we'll get this thing painted and looking perfect. Now I'm going to use some Ronseal wood filler, and I'm going to use my wood filler just to fill any of them screw heads and all of the little joint gaps. With your filler, make sure you get all those little nail heads as well. Once that filler's gone hard, we can just use a bit of sandpaper just to flatten it off, or we can use an electric sander if we've got one. Now the sanding's done, our joints are absolutely perfect, but we need to make sure that we don't need to use any decorator's caulk on any gaps between our panels. Now that's the other benefit of using the MDF backer, is that you can see, if I bring you in closer, that all the joints all the way around are absolutely perfect. There's no gaps in them. Now let's say we added some decorator's caulk in there and we had to smooth that off. What we would inevitably end up with is a rounded corner where we smooth that off with a finger or a tool, and it wouldn't be as sharp or as precise. So that's why the backer board gives us that advantage. The only place you might need to caulk is between an adjoining wall and your paneling. In our case, you can see that because this wall's perfectly plumb, there's no gap. It is spot on. So we can move on to painting without the need of any decorator's caulk. Before you start painting, apply frog tape all the way around the edges of the panels. Now before we put any colour on this, we're going to prime it with an MDF primer. This is a dedicated MDF primer. I'll link it in the description. This is the one I like to use. Now the best thing to put this on with is a brush for all the intricate parts and a mini roller for everything else, making sure we get good coverage. Now for the exciting bit, we can choose a colour. This is just matte emulsion in Sapphire Salute, but you can choose whatever colour suits your room. At the moment that looks really blue. It won't be, it dries a lot darker than that. Now a lot of people have issues when they paint MDF, and it's all down to the primer. That primer you saw me use, that has sealed this perfectly, and it's lovely and easy to paint. Now all the intricate areas into all the detail, I do that with a small brush, and then once I've gone round with my little brush, I use a mini roller just to fill in the big areas. I find dark colours give a better contrast with the lines than a light colour. They show off the panels a lot better. Of course it's hard to see because that's not completely dry, and that's the only thing with the white primer. It does take a few coats. It'll probably take 3 coats to show the true colour and to stop that white showing through. So rather than you getting bored and watching paint dry, I'm going to skip ahead to the final coat and we'll see what we created. And there it is. It took 3 coats of paint, but it looks amazing. It really does transform any room, and you guys can now take this on yourself nice and easy. So I hope it's helped. To find another cool option with wall paneling, click on this video, and to find a media wall weekend project, click on this video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.